Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hafidez Antiro, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we are looking at Women's History Month here on the show. It's being celebrated throughout the U.S. as a month set aside to honor women's contributions in American history, culture, and society. And today we're taking a look at the celebration through the eyes of our indigenous cultures here in the Marianas. Our guest is Manuel Flores Borja. He is a Chamorro author of several books, including Estrellas Marianas, a book of poetry, stories, and poems, co-authored with his brother Joaquin Borja and also Sandy Chung. Also the co-author of Traditional Healers and Medicinal Plants in the CNMI with Joe Roppel, and a book that is coming out shortly, Cantan Samarita with Carmen Taimanao. Señor Manny, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour.
This is Masi and Tiro. Welcome also everybody. We appreciate your time to be with us today.
Absolutely, and what a great reason for us to get together talking about the role of women in traditional Chamorro culture for this show. Chamorro culture, of course, is a matrilineal society. Can you share with us a little bit about what that means for us?
Yes, and thank you. Right now, we can very easily see how Chamorro culture is matrilineal. In that, as an example, my mother has a first name, middle name, and last name. My father has a first name, middle name, and last name. And then when my mother married my father, my mother's last name became her middle name, and she acquired the last name of my father. So then my mother and my father both have the same last names. But then my mother has a different middle name from my father's, and then when I was born and my other siblings, we carried our mother's middle name and last name, and that's a good example of how the matrilineal lineage, is exemplified in the Chamorro culture. And it's not, the only culture, but that's an example of a matrilineal clan culture.
Now, there is some documentation about how the ancient Chamorros lived this matrilineal life more so than today. And it basically means that a person's descent, as you've described, is passed down through their mother or their maternal ancestors. And in a matrilineal society, property such as land is handed down from the mother to the daughter. And we're not the only people in the world that have matrilineal society. There are people groups in the Americas, Africa, Asia. Mm-hmm. Do you have any knowledge of what it was like in the old days and what the role of women was like in the old days?
Yes, I would like to say it this way, that I think if we approach it from a different perspective from how we would normally do it, from our modern day perspective of, women and men, different roles, that I would think that in the older days of the Chamorro culture, the older days of any indigenous culture, that the roles of men and women are not so much separated, but are considered part of the one societal entity. In Chamorro, as in many other languages too, there is no difference in gender for like brother or sister. It's all both Chelu. The difference between your brother or sister is not there in the language, and in that, that the significance is that the differentiation between the two is not that significant for me to, see them as different roles, but as part of the one one sibling, and then one part of the community, one part of the group. And so um, different roles of women and the men were not considered very much like one is better than the other, but or one is more important than the other, but they're um, equally important and equally respected and equally of value. So I think when we try to look at men and women and try to bring this kind of like which one is better, which one is, or the separation, then we lose that kind of understanding that when there wasn't that kind of attitude toward men and women, more as humans rather than, a man and a woman. So I would think that the role of women played in the role of humans, just as the role of men played in the role of human. So here's the human society that has male and female, and in that way, the women at that time played the role, but it is not as separate in terms of value or strength or importance. Because the reason why I'm saying this is because in our Western, after the indigenous practices throughout the world, then many parts of the world became more like a scientific, Western, and that we lose that oneness, and so we separate. And there was a time in human history where women were not even allowed to vote. They lost all their rights. But I think in the indigenous society, the women did not lose those rights.
I like the point that you made about the Chamorro word. It is the same word for brother and sister. Salud.
Salud, yeah.
And we say many times this is why preservation of the language is so important, because inside the language you can understand the thinking of the people and the culture and the way they see the world, which is what you're saying, in that brother and sister were perceived the same under this word to describe them both, which may be the equivalent of like sibling. Maybe it wasn't like a brother or a sister, but it was just the word sibling, born of the same mother. Right. I wanted to share a little bit about what is written in the textbook History of the Northern Mariana Islands by Don Farrell. And this particular section, of course, was recorded by a Westerner. So it is from an outside perspective of what they observed in the ancient Chamorro society. Quoting, women exercise substantial authority in Chamorro society. One reporter of the women said of the women, quote, "In this country they have the rights which pertain to husbands everywhere else. The woman alone rules the house. She is the boss and has all the authority, and the husband cannot arrange even the smallest thing without her consent," end quote. That sounds pretty extreme. I think in my perception, modern day, in my lifetime, it's kind of like that, but not exactly. It's really different when you observe a culture from the outside. You may see something and interpret it through your own lens, but I would say that there is a certain degree to which Chamorro women do have a lot of responsibility in the house. For example, to manage the household, and to make sure the bills are paid and the women are the children are taken care of, and things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, exactly. There are roles. For example, part of the women's role in the past was to weave mats, for mats, and I certainly experienced that because all the mats that I grew up sleeping on were woven by my mother, not by my father. And then, so those kinds, and then the men would go out fishing out more in the outer reef, and the women may. So there are those roles there. And in terms of domestic kind of like role, yeah, I think it worked out very nicely for me when I saw and I see that the house is managed by the women, even finances. the man goes out earning a salary and comes home and hands the paycheck to the mother, and then would get some as he asked for somebody. The mother managed that, and that role and that kind of activity, it worked nicely. Yeah, so there's that. Yeah, I think psychologically too, when the Europeans came and saw that the women in the Chamorro society, or maybe even in many indigenous society, have greater roles than what they experience in their home, that they may see that they may blow it up more because they exaggerate, maybe like maybe
it's exotic or something like
it's
that.
exotic, and that it's not belief, and so they put more kind of like amazement to that rather than an acceptance, and so women also in terms of in the older days had high roles in decision, and I think later on we'll talk about the differences in the feminine thinking and masculine thinking. But I think the indigenous people saw that the different way of thinking, that because they value that, they did not just look for one way of thinking, but honor both. And so that is why many times the women also were asked for guidance and even become magahaga, become leaders, and that's good.
Yeah, you mentioned that they were responsible often for making the mats, taking care of the children in the house. Back in the day, they would be the gatherers of food in the jungle, making coconut oil, pottery, and most of the cooking, and medicine, which is something you're very familiar with. Just out of curiosity, when you wrote your book, Traditional Healers in the Marianas, did you find, I know there are very few traditional healers left. Are there any, or were there any at that time, any women healers? Were they mostly women, or were they mostly men, or was it kind of even?
Yes, I guess to explain more, the book that Joe and I wrote were actually from interviews that we did with the healers. So it's not that I was a healer, but that we interviewed, Joe and I interviewed, so that we would honor these healers, because when we thought, okay, 100 years ago or 50 years ago, do we know these healers? We don't. But we wanted to preserve the healers of today, so that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we will honor them, because what we have in the history books are many times, leaders, politicians, and not local pillars in our culture. So that was one of the reasons why we wrote the book. It is through the efforts by the of the Inanun Amol Nativo, the Together Carolinian and Chamorro Association, to honor the healers. Were there about the same? There are some medicine that kind of like were given for women and for men, and some for both, because some say that sometimes with women, when they have their menstruation, maybe it is not good to practice. So there are those kinds of realization, but both men and women were healers. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're chatting today about the role of women in traditional and modern Chamorro culture, and we'll be back with more after this break.
Did you know that the Northern Marianas Humanities Council is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year? Si Auntie Chayla Ngesti. We eat healthy fruits and vegetables for a healthy body, no? Well, the humanities are like healthy food for our soul. Gofmani, Ed Hitler. Adahi, don't forget your daily dose of the humanities this year. Go to their Facebook or their website, in Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Atcha Bebe.
Welcome back to Your Humanities Half Hour. We're chatting with Chamorro author Manuel Flores Borja about women in traditional Chamorro culture. Senor Manny, I wanted to ask you, in your family growing up, What values did you see in your mother and maybe your grandmother or your aunt that were important for your family?
Yes, thank you. I think I can speak a little bit more of what I saw from my mother, and that is reflective of, I think, women in general. My father died when I was 11 years old, so my mother was a single mom raising us up. But the value that they showed us is more of a kind of like, extended the values, not just for here and now, but an extension of survival and sustainability. I am seeing the difference between what a woman would naturally feel or think, and what would a man would naturally feel and think. And let me give an example. It's just very recent. A woman was sharing with me how in their family they had butternut trees, and that often in the night when they were sleeping, people would come and help themselves with the butternut. And the husband said, "How about if we put a mean dog so that they would scare or even bite them?" And the woman said, we know that sometimes these people bring in like children, like if they're going to enter a house, maybe bring a child to enter a smaller opening, and what if that happens and the dog bites the child? I will be forever not forgiving myself. And for me, I'm saying this to see how the difference in thinking. The thought of the woman is for the future of, and also has more compassion. And so that, I think, what I learned from my mom and others is the compassion, that they think not just for the now, present situation, but for a long-lasting situation. You mentioned about the Estrellas Marianas, and in there we talked about the wisdom of the elders, and it showed the forgiveness, the willingness of forgiving, because they, according to their explanation, is that because when they forgive, they feel better, rather than harboring this anger. And I think women are more easier to forgive. So in terms of values, there's a difference between women's way of thinking and man's way of thinking. Some related to the male is more, one side of the brain, the other women is more the other side of the brain. Man's way of thinking is more kind of like, analysis and
logical.
The other one is more holistic and, intuitive. And the both, I think, is important in a human being, and that is why I think that it is good that we are talking about this. I remember that when we were talking earlier about being interviewed for the women, and I said some may question why I, as a man, being interviewed about women's, but I think it is on reflection about this, what I said to you. It came to me that maybe it is a good symbol of how we can more and more unite as one human being, rather than male and female. So that it's not only that for women's only women would be talking, and not only also for men, not only men would talking, but when we bring in both, because we're both humans. As an example, sometimes in the male kind of thinking, that they raise their children, they say, boys don't cry, things like that, or men don't cry. It has always bothered me, because that is not healthy. And also for me, it would be, all right, so boys don't cry, men don't cry. Are you human? I would say humans cry. So go ahead and cry if you're human,
Yeah.
So things like that. The allowance for the parts of us that are healthy to be there. I'm getting lost my How much time do
I
you have?
like, thank you for bringing up that, our discussion earlier when I asked you if you would be willing to speak on this. And you did say, like, but, I'm not a woman. Why are you asking me? And I do share your sentiment that uh, we need to understand each other more, value and appreciate our similarities more. And I really wanted to hear. I thought it would be good for us to hear from somebody who had perspective and had knowledge. And I appreciate so much that you were willing to share what you know with us. And if I understand you correctly, one of the things that you would like to emphasize is the benefit of having balance as we interact and work together with each other as men and women in understanding each other and valuing each other. Why do you feel it's important for, as you said, men to embrace their feminine side and women to embrace their male side? Why, or shall we say, common traits, like you said, being logical, or why is it important for all of us to be balanced in these areas, in your opinion?
Yes, in my opinion, and thank you for that, because there's simply health means balance. And when we are imbalanced, we're not healthy. And so to keep our health, we need to keep our balance. And we have these two natural given qualities in humans. And we should balance that. Just as, we should, there's a call now for going to bringing your inner child out. It is not a call to be childish, but to be childlike, to be in that state of the child being like when they come to a new thing that they haven't been to, they are in awe and they appreciate things. I remember my nephew, for example, the first time he saw a baby chick in his hand, he went from the place where the baby chick, I'm going, it's so cute. You're so cute. All the way for minutes and minutes, walking to the front side of the house. That kind of, experience and feeling we have lost when we grow up. So there's a call now for that kind of way of looking at things to come out again, so that we can enjoy life more, to be like as children are, be more free. And in line with that, let me just share a teaching from a woman that says to acknowledge the hand of grace, to connect with your source. So we're talking about our nature. To connect with your source and the goodness and love at your core, it is necessary to notice and acknowledge that the divine is eminent and operate in your life and in every life. You are deeply loved and guided in every moment by that which created you and lives in you and through you. If you do not see the truth of this, you will accept your mind's conclusion about life. These conclusions will not serve you. So here we are in this pandemic situation, and when we resort more to fear rather than to not fear-based, then we can be more balanced. In the world today with physics, we talked about Newtonian physics, that it's cause and effect, But then modern physics now says that's not all to it. There's more fundamental than the Newtonian physics of mechanical. There's this quantum field that is based on benevolence. That there's more love in all of us than struggle, than the man thing. That there's more women. For me, it is like more realization of what women already know or feel or intuit, and that man's reasoning is realizing that. So there's this coming back of spirituality and science to be one, male and female to be one, and celebration of this as one, as human. And for me, I see, in that story of the woman who mentioned about not putting a dog to harm this. There's that futuristic thinking, of survival. So for me, what I would say is that in order for humanity to advance, for the future to progress in a more sustainable way, then men ought to be listening to women more. And in that way there's balance, in that way there's more sustainability, in that way there's more love, in that way we're more one. And women are more, easily can see this. In Chamorro there's also the word polo, which has a lot of different meanings. But in one concept of polo is, let it be.
Let it go.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Polo. And women will be more, will find this easier for them to say than men. Women would, say more polo more often than men. Men would not polo. And then it has been said that one of the biggest problems with humans is the need to be, or the want to be right. And people go to wars or separate because they want to be right. And when two people are in an argument, for example, a man and a woman, I think it's the woman who it would be easier for a woman to allow for the man, even though the man is not right, to say, okay, you're right. So that there's survival. And so for me, in that there's strength. The woman is stronger in saying, okay, I will swallow my pride and let you be. It takes courage. So in that sense, women are more courageous than men who do not want to lose. As an example, here's this tree, the very strong tree standing, and the wind comes along, and it wants to stand its ground and will not bend. It will break because the force of the wind will break it. But if this tall tree, in its strength, would bend to the wind, in its weakness in bending, it shows its strength because it survives. So very obviously we have seen that women in general outlive men.
One of the things I love about our chat today is you seem to be sharing more of the emotional side of the issue, and I seem to be coming with the facts. We're reversing roles here. But I did want to mention that I know there was a survey done a couple years ago by the government looking at wage disparity between men and women here in the CNMI, and they found, as I recall, almost no wage disparity when it comes to a certain job category. Here in the Marianas, men and women were being paid generally the same. And I just wanted to point that out because I think it shows that there's something about our culture that has made that possible. It's, as you said, the valuing, the equal valuing. I think that comes from our history, and it's something that we can look to and as an example for others. We don't always have to take the examples from outside our islands. We also have things to teach the world. And I think when it comes to the role of women and the role of men, this is one of our strengths.
Here we show the balancing that is there, and it's good. So this is the call for women to be more patient with the men as you demonstrate your strength in your what the men think your weakness, but you know that you are strong. The women in the Chamorro culture has made it possible for the language to survive. There were many of the men died, and it was more women who survived, and it is the women who taught their children the language, and so it is because of the women in the Chamorro culture that the language survived. Also, in terms of medicine, it is the women who made it to survive this Tan Rosa from Tanapak did say that it is the women who were able to propagate plants and to see the need for local medicine and for the native medicine to survive. It is the women played a role in that.
Well, we've been talking about Women's History Month today through the lens of our indigenous Chamorro culture, chatting with Senor Manuel Flores Borja. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your opinions with us today.
Jesus Masi, on the wine.
This has been Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.